branded our speaker series after her. So every time that we have a speaker series, we can keep her in our thoughts, and the passion she had around the topic of racial equity, particularly for African Americans, we can keep that in front of us. So thank you for all of your support, as we all grieved Zoe's passing from a Common Bonds Board perspective, and her friends and family. So we're really excited tonight of having two great speakers and a wonderful moderator to talk about white privilege and their experiences in relation to understanding what white privilege is, realizing when they had white privilege, and the actions that they're taking in major leadership roles in their companies and in their personal lives as well, to help drive accountability and taking action for change and equity in relation to whites and African Americans working collaboratively together and having an equitable society that we all live in. Mentioned a couple of housekeeping rules. One of and you'll see them up here, please mute your line. And to see only the speakers during the discussion, there's three, on Google Meet here, there's 3 dots in the lower right corner of your screen. Then you can choose to change layout and change the layout for whatever you'd like. Another thing is on Google Meets, you'll see on the top right, there is a box that has 3 little dots in it. That's the chat feature. And the chat feature is where we have you ask questions. So as we go along, please put your questions in the chat feature. I will type in real quick the word question so you can see it pop up. And you can ask your questions through that chat feature. The other thing that's really worked well for us during these sessions is not only people putting things in there, but also giving feedback on thoughts you have on the topics we're discussing, or additional resources that you know of, et cetera. So, we've had, particularly in the last session, we had a number of people using it as a communication mechanism as well, which is wonderful. But specifically, we'll keep an eye on that and try to address all the questions that are there. So, without further ado, let me introduce our esteemed guest today. So, our first panelist is Chip Rossi. Tell you a little bit about Chip. Chip is a graduate of Gettysburg University, and his current role is the Global Compliance and Operational Risk Executive at Bank of America, which is one of the world's leading financial service companies. Chip's also the market president of the state of Delaware for Bank of America. He joined Bank of America and its predecessor in 1989, and has worked in a number of different areas, leadership positions in the consumer banking organization. One of the admirable things, not only with Chip, but Tom and Tracey, that I'll go through real quick, is their community service and how they give back. Chip is on a number of boards, including the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce, the Delaware State University Foundation, Christiana Care Health Services, the Grand Opera House, Habitat for Humanity for Newcastle County, Europe, Greater Philadelphia and Wilmington, the William Penn High School Advisory Board, Delaware Tech and Community College Development Committee, and the Delaware Business Roundtable, to name a few. So Chip, thank you for joining us and welcome. Also want to introduce our other panelist, Tom Horne. Tom is a graduate of the University of Delaware. He is the managing director and the head of card operations, customer service, and lending for the card service business of JP Morgan Chase, also one of the world's largest financial services companies. Tom currently leads more than 11,000 employees in 14 service centers in the US and Asia. Tom joined Chase in 2012 after 23 years with MBNA and Bank of America, and also has held numerous leadership positions within the consumer bank in his career. And he's also extremely active in the community, including being on the advisory board of the Lerner Business College at the University of Delaware, a member of the Executive Mentor Scholars Program at the University of Delaware, William Penn High School Advisory Board, board member and past president of the Big Brothers and Big Sisters in Delaware, board member of Delaware State Chamber of Commerce, and a board member of the Delaware State Roundtable. So Tom, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Great to be here, Mike.
And I'm absolutely thrilled that Tracey Matisak has agreed to moderate our session tonight. Many of you, particularly in the Philadelphia area, will recognize her wonderful smiling face. Tracey's an award-winning journalist, a dynamic speaker and trainer, and a seasoned program host and facilitator. She's got more than 25 years of major market television and radio experience. She currently serves as a moderator for the Philadelphia Speaker Series and a frequent moderator for the Author Series at the Free Library of Philadelphia. For many of you in the Philadelphia market, she's best known for her work in television news, having spent 12 years at Fox 29 Philadelphia, where she anchored the live morning show Good Day Philadelphia, was an anchor on the 10 o'clock news. Many philanthropic activities and awards, including being an adjunct professor in the Klein College of Media and Communications at Temple, winner of multiple Emmy Awards, among the first inducted into Temple University School of Media and Communications Hall of Fame. She received the Sarah Award for Excellence in Broadcasting from the Association for Women in Communications, and she was voted the Communicator of the Year by the National Black MBA Association. So, as you can see, we have some wonderfully not only qualified, but very philanthropic folks who joined us today. I've had the wonderful privilege of working with Chip and Tom in the past, and knowing Tracey as a personal friend for many years. So we're thrilled that you're here. Their bios, I only read a portion of them, if you could believe that. So if you want to learn more about their experiences and their backgrounds, go onto our website. It's part of the registration. They're all very, very impressive individuals. And with that, Tracey, I'm going to hand it over to you as our moderator and get on with the great dialogue. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Mike. It is an honor to be here with all of you. I'm so looking forward to this conversation, and just want to thank Mike and April and the whole team at Common Bonds for really facilitating these conversations for us. I can't think of anything more important right now other than eradicating COVID. This is a hugely important conversation. So we're delighted to have so many people with us tonight. We have budgeted time for your questions, as Mike said, so you can just click on that little chat box, should be around the upper right of your screen, and put your question there, and we will get through as many as we can. So that said, Chip Rossi and Tom Horne, welcome. Thank you both so much for making time for this conversation.
Thank you, Tracey. Thank you.
So we'll start at the beginning here. We're talking about white privilege, and I think it probably makes sense to define our terms a little bit and try to get our arms around what we're talking about here, what white privilege is or is not. And different people may have different definitions of what that is, but Tom Horne, I'll start with you. When you think of white privilege, how do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to just thank Mike and April for what you're doing, and Tracey and my good longtime friend, Chip Rossi. Just really looking forward to a conversation tonight. And I want to first say that I do not have all the answers. I'm not even remotely close to being an expert on this topic. What I am in the middle of is a very intensive learning journey. I am eager to learn. I am teachable. And that's why I'm here tonight. It's why when Mike asked if I would participate in this with Chip, I immediately said yes, because I knew I would walk away from this conversation probably learning more than anybody else on here. But I have spent a lot of time this year, thinking more deep about the overall topic of equity, of race, and certainly white privilege is a component of that. And one thing I do know what white privilege is, well, a couple things. One, I know I have it, and I know I will have it for the rest of my life. And I also know that I've done nothing to deserve it, and I've done nothing to earn it, and that in most of walks of my life, it's something that is completely invisible to me. And what I know that it is not is something that I have earned. And I think it takes some time. You have to invest some time to really think about that and open your mind to that, to accepting that fact. And I think that's part of the issue. I know I can honestly say, and I think when we had talked earlier, Tracey, you asked, when did I realize I had white privilege? And I have to confess that I didn't realize it until this year. I just never, and it's because I never thought about it. And I think that's the problem with most white people. They don't give it the time. They don't give it the thought. It's an intimidating thought for a lot of people, and as a result, you just don't confront it. And I've learned through my deep thinking on this year, the obvious, frankly, is if I do have white privilege, then somebody has to be disadvantaged in order for me to have white privilege, and that's Black people typically. Or said differently, if you believe that Black people are often disadvantaged, then somebody has to have privilege.
Mm.
And that's more often than not white people. And so it's just so odd to me that I've never thought about it in that context. I've never thought about, well, to have one, you have to have the other. And by the way, if you're white and you don't believe that Black people are often disadvantaged, then you just haven't opened your mind, or you're not being honest with yourself. And so let's just accept the fact that Black people face disadvantages. Therefore, white people must have privilege. It's kind of just a fact. And so that's, I'll talk more later about my experience in this field, but that was like, I thought I was pretty woke. And that was a big time learning for me this year because I never took the time to think about it.
Yeah, this year's been a game changer, I think, for a lot of people, Tom. Chip Rossi, what do you say? How do you think about white privilege?
Tracey, I just start echoing Tom's sentiments just on thank you for facilitating this discussion with Tom and I, and for Mike and April and the folks at Common Bonds. Thank you for providing us with this opportunity. And I am just thrilled. Tom and I go way back. We knew one another as kids, and through this journey together professionally as well, our families have grown up, and it's just it's a joy to be with him tonight to talk about this. And I would just say this, that the first thing is that just understand that what I convey and what I say to anybody, I'm speaking from the heart. So if something doesn't come across the exact way that I want it to be, just understand that it's coming from a place of I care and trying to do the right thing. But when I think about white privilege, and the thing that really became evident to me is I felt like, listen, I grew up, my dad was a bricklayer, my mother was a homemaker. We had 3 bedrooms, mom and dad, my sister and my 2 brothers and I shared a room together. We didn't have much. We needed assistance throughout life. And I thought that was, hey, I get it. I understand. But the reality of it is this year, and Tom said it, this year, it just smacked me that's not, you don't get it. You don't understand. And what you realize is, well, what does that mean? Well, you start having conversations, when the pandemic hits, you start to see that things are actually affecting communities differently. And then you start to see the tragic events that occurred over the summer months with the death of George Floyd and others. And you start to have conversations with some of your colleagues and friends. And those are Black people that you're talking to. And a couple things you realized is, one, I had no idea what the conversation was about. I had a good friend of mine, in fact, a good friend of Tom and I's, talk about this conversation and realize that, wait a second, what are you talking about? And then you talk to another Black colleague and you realize, well, there's a similar story. And then you talk to somebody else and there's a similar story. Mm-hmm. And you start to realize, well, wait a second here, there's a common denominator. And then you start looking at data, right? You go out and you look at whether it's unemployment rates, you look at wealth gap, you look at incarceration rates, all of those things you look at, and it always skews to the side of unemployment rates, incarceration rates, wealth gap, Blacks, Hispanic, Latinos, and whites always being the lowest. That's a problem. And that's when you realize, wait a second here, something's going on. And to Tom's point, I didn't even realize it until this year that white privilege existed. And it's been a journey that I'm just on. And the the reality of it is I've got a lot to learn, and I'm continuing to learn. But one of the things I will say to you is this, is that what I've realized through this journey is that silence is not an option any longer. Standing by as a white individual in a position of influence is no longer an option. And I need to do something differently.
Yeah. So Chip, you kind of brought up my next question and led me to it in terms of doing something, because both of you clearly are involved in diversity and equality initiatives at your respective workplaces. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, about what you're doing, and more importantly, why you care about this, because both of you are at a point in your careers where you could say, you know what, this is for somebody else to manage. So Tom, I'll start with you again. If you would talk a little bit about, how you've been involved and what you've done with the knowledge that you do in fact have white privilege. And so what do you do with that now?
Well, remember, I just figured out that I had white privilege this year. So, but let me just tug on what Chip said first a little bit. Chip talked about his upbringing of, very humble beginnings. We grew up in the same community, went to the same high school. Chip told me earlier this year that he thought we were wealthy because we had a one-car garage growing up, and that was like a big deal. But it's an example of what white privilege is not. It does not mean that white people don't struggle. That's not the point. And I think a lot of white people kind of use that as a defense mechanism. Well, there is no such thing as white privilege. There are plenty of white people who are unemployed or who are in poverty or who struggle. That's not the point. And so by opening your mind and wanting to learn and thinking about things differently, as Chip and I have discussed, it just opens your eyes and your mind to looking at things from a completely different point of view. Chip and I went to William Penn High School in Newcastle, Delaware, for those of you that are local here in Delaware, a pretty socio-economically and ethnically diverse high school, relatively speaking. And that's another defense mechanism that white people use that I was completely unaware of until this year. When you say something like, well, I went to a diverse high school, or I have black friends, or I'm colorblind, or, I just picked the next best person for the job, you're not being honest. You're not being completely honest. You're actually putting up defenses that perpetuate this problem. So, look, I've been in this business for 32 years. By the way, through wonderful conversations with my teammates, just like Chip, I've learned more there than anywhere else. I never thought about it before, and I realized I've never had a black boss in 32 years. 32
Wow.
years in the business. Anyway, I've been doing this for a long time, and almost my entire career, I've led large groups of people. And if you're going to lead a large team, you're only going to be successful if you have the most talented team possible. And so have always been one that was on the lookout for talent. But I never actively looked for an opportunity to get involved in diversity and inclusion. I remember the day when our CEO at the time called me in 2006 and said he wanted me to start up a diversity and inclusion council for our credit card business. This was at Bank of America at the time. And sure, I'd be happy to. And I hung the telephone and I said, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? I have no idea. I know nothing about the topic. I'm comfortable leading, but I'm not comfortable leading this. And it kind of forced me into it. And for those listening who are looking for a way or a reason to get involved, just take it, because I'm telling you, in the last 14 years, it has been the most rewarding work that I have ever done. And so I have been involved in actively leading diversity and inclusion councils since 2006. I serve on the JP Morgan Chase firm-wide diversity and inclusion council, co-chair of the council in our very large 150,000 consumer and community banking business, and the executive sponsor of our Black professionals group here in the Mid-Atlantic region. But I'm also very involved in external emerging talent programs that we take advantage of. Chip's involved with these as well. Zip Code Delaware, Year Up, which is an organization that's focused on kids that are at risk, that need an opportunity, and it brings them in to an internship program at Year Up and an internship inside the company. So selfishly, I got involved in this stuff because my boss asked me to start it. And it was way outside of my comfort zone. And you get rewarded by your work in this. You find great people to put on your team, but you also, you get as much out of it, if not more, than you're giving to it if you really, really want to do it. And I've never stopped and I never will. But a final point on this is, all that said, I told you I've been doing this for 14 years now. 14. This year I realized how little I actually knew. I mean, literally, how much further I had to go and how much more I had to learn.
Well, thank you for being so honest about that. And before I go to Chip, because Chip, I want you to talk about the same thing, but you mentioned never having had a Black boss.
Yeah.
And sort of the lack of diversity. And, one of the things that you often hear a corporate leader say when asked about, the lack of diversity in a workplace, and they will say, oh, I'd love to have more Black employees, Black managers, et cetera, just can't find any, or there aren't very many. What do you say to that when you hear people say, I'm sure we would have more Black people, but we just can't seem to find them.
Well, I would say that you're not looking hard enough, or you're not looking at all, is the answer. And I actually, pardon my frankness, but I actually think it's a bit of a stupid answer. I heard yesterday that 350,000 students, Black students, will graduate from HBCUs. 350,000, and that only represents a quarter of the Black college graduates. So somewhere around 1.5 million Black students will graduate from college this year. And that's just people with degrees. 70% of the jobs that were posted at JP Morgan Chase last year do not require a 4-year degree. So the talent is out there. And if you can't find it, you aren't looking. And if you're not looking, you are not committed to adding diverse talent to your team. You're just not making the time for it. You're not making the time to think about it, and you're not making the time to pursue a diverse team. It's the easy excuse. It is the lazy answer. It is the problem. It is the reason this problem still exists today. The lazy answers are the easy answers. They are the ones that people think they can defend. So I just think it's a ridiculous answer. I guess lazy is the best word. I think it's just a lazy response.
Chip Rossi, you certainly are involved in lots of initiatives around this as well. Talk a little bit about the work that you're doing. In fact, one thing I specifically want to ask you about is that I was reading about you that Bank of America at one point raised the question, what would you like the power to do? And your response was to close the opportunity divide for youth and disadvantaged families. So I'd love for you to talk maybe about that and just about some of the work that you're doing around this, and then I've got a follow-up after that.
Sure, Tracy. I think in many respects, Tom touched on it, which is, what I saw, quite frankly, was the fact that, people just, regardless of your rate, you deserve opportunity. And in this case, you have Black people that are having challenges and aren't being afforded opportunities because they may not be aware of them, to no fault of their own. And the reality of it is that one of the organizations that both Tom and I became familiar with was Year Up. And it's a terrific organization that works with young people, teaching them life skills, and then providing them with opportunities to go work at companies where they can actually earn income that's above a livable wage and creates life-changing experiences for them and obviously for their families that now becomes a generational impact that will occur for generations to come long after, I leave this earth or any one of us leaves this earth. And so from that perspective, that is the organization that I chose to get involved with regard to that. And that's what what would you like the power to do? That's what it was directly related to, which is the work associated with the young adults there that just needed a little bit of a help. And once you give them a little bit of a push, they take it from there. And that's what's been wonderful, is to see that. And quite frankly, I think from a business standpoint, what I would say to you is that having a team that is reflective of the communities, regardless of what you do. We're in the financial services business, but regardless of what you do, if your team is reflective of the communities that you serve, you're going to make better decisions. You're going to do things better, and your company will reflect that over the long term. So I just think it's a core principle that you should have in running a business. And quite frankly, as an individual, the only thing I would say to everybody here is, look, one person can make a difference, okay? But find your passion and just get involved. Just start helping to make a change. And so I would just encourage you the thing I would say is do something. Just do something, okay? And help move the ball forward.
Yeah.
Can I share an example that on the Year Up program that you talked about? I met a gentleman in the program this summer. His name's Ron, and he's a black man, an imposing figure, a big guy, tattoos all over, including on his face. And if he would have walked into my office for a job interview, I don't even know if I would have accepted the interview. But I met him through this program and learned his story, him and his wife and their young son, how they had just lost their living arrangement, had no idea what they were going to do, literally no idea, and got into the Year Up program. And fast forward, a long story short, they both work here. He's in operations in our investment bank. She's a software engineer, and they have a household income of over $150,000 now. These are two people that, if I'm being perfectly honest, I passed them on the street. I would have never thought about giving them a job here. And so it's just another example of how we have to think differently. We all have to think differently and throw the stereotypes out. Stop judging books by the cover. Stop using how you were raised or all these lazy answers and excuses, and give people a chance.
Well, it kind of leads me into the next question, Tom, which is, what do you think that the workplace loses by not having greater diversity, by not including more people of color and African Americans in particular, since that's the focus of our conversation? But what gets lost in that process?
Well, like Chip said, I'm a believer that talent is equally distributed and opportunity is not. So if you believe that talent is equally distributed and your team is not diverse, then you don't have the most talented team you possibly can have. And whether you're a sports team or a business, you will not perform at your highest level if you don't have the most talented team you can have. So it's pretty simple to me. And the studies are there. Companies that are more diverse perform better. They earn more money, greater returns for their shareholder. It is a fact. But if you're going to build a team, if you're going to lead a team, you want the strongest team possible. Yeah. And if it's not a diverse team, if it doesn't represent your client base, if it doesn't represent the community that you're in, then you're simply not going to win. And not only that, Chip and I cut our teeth in a company that many people on this call probably know, that was unequivocally a wonderful company that cared about its people like no other that I have ever seen. But we were not diverse. We were not diverse at all. And so I find myself just kind of reflecting back on those early times of my career and then asking the question, why weren't we? We were heterogeneous. And so why is that? And as good as we were, how much better could we have been had we been more diverse at the time?
Yeah. And Chip, I think that speaks to just this idea that, white privilege is so ingrained. It's as Peggy McIntosh, who is an activist and feminist and a researcher at Wellesley, and she wrote about the invisible knapsack back in 1989, and talked about how it's there, it's in the air, like you don't even notice it. And Chip Rossi, I want to go to you to get your thoughts about that, about how it's just something that you don't even see that it's there. You don't even realize it until something happens that opens your eyes.
Yeah, it's Tracey. I actually took the liberty to take a look at that article, and it was. If folks haven't, we should share that link. I know, Mike, you've shared that. I mean, it really is an opportunity to reflect and learn. And it was interesting. I mean, as I went through it and as I was reading things, I think to your point, Tracey, it's you have to acknowledge the fact that you don't know what it's like to walk in somebody's shoes. Exactly. I'm not black. I don't know what it's like to live as a black male or a black female. I just don't. And that's been hard to get my head around this year. And I started to get my head around it. As I said to you earlier, it's been this year that woke me up from the standpoint of the fact that, look, you've got to accept that first and just acknowledge that, you know, your skin color is different. You don't know what it's like to do it. And now as you do that, I mean, it was one of the things that I went through, and one of the folks that's on the call here is Hank Weaver. We had a 21-day challenge with United Way, and it was really articles and different videos and podcasts to listen to. And it was interesting. A story around the fact of you're a black male with a hoodie walking down the neighborhood. Okay. White people around thinking, what's happening? A little worried. Go to the other side. Think of yourself as that black male walking down that road. What do you think he's thinking about? Okay. And that when I just shifted that and then said, what about me as a white male walking in that community? You started to realize, holy cow, it really is about understanding that it is different and you don't walk in those shoes, but to acknowledge it, be aware of it, and then learn from it. And then the reality of it is, Tracey, I go back to, as you get your education, you begin to acknowledge things, then the question starts to become, what do you do about it? Right. And part of tonight is just sharing thoughts and acknowledging those things together. And my hope is that through this discussion, folks will leave maybe thinking about, what am I going to do differently tomorrow to positively impact the community that I'm a part of? So
Yeah.
Those are my thoughts, Tracey.
Well, thank you for that. And in the meantime, Mike has posted a link to that article that I was talking about by Peggy McIntosh. And in fact, I think it would be instructive for our audience to I'm just going to share a couple of points, but she sort of made this 50-point list of things that fall under the heading of white privilege. It is by no means exhaustive, but just a couple of things to give you the idea. So one is, if I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and in which I would want to live. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. I do not have to educate my children to be aware of systemic racism for their own daily physical protection. So those are just 4 of 50 points that are instructive. And again, there's so much more to it than that, but Mike has posted that, and we highly recommend that everybody take a look at that, because I think it does give a good idea of kind of what we're talking about here. Chip, I'm going to stay with you for just a moment, because both of you have said that this year you really learned something. And I'd be curious to dig a little bit deeper on that, to find out what was it? What was the epiphany that you had this year, and why was this year different? After all of these years of sort of working in diversity and inclusion, what was it about this year that really sort of opened your eyes, and what did you learn? And Chip, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Tom.
Tracey, it's, I'll say this to you, which is, I thought I understood because of, I experienced challenges, right? And felt like I had to work hard to accomplish the things that I needed to accomplish. But what I realized through, and I will tell you, it was one conversation that I had with a dear friend of mine. And I realized a couple things. One is when he talked to me about the fact that he was a black male, very successful. And he's talking to me about the fact that his mother had a conversation with him about, if you get pulled over, here's what you need to do, the conversation. I referenced that earlier. And what I realized at that point in time is, for me, it hit me hard, because I felt like I started looking at myself saying, well, why didn't I get this? Why didn't I know this earlier? Why didn't you feel comfortable talking to me about those. You start asking all those questions around the fact of, I thought we had a pretty good relationship, that you would share those things with me. And what I realized is that doesn't matter. What matters now is take a step back and just listen. And then what I also realized is that, we would stay in touch, but I'd also realize that I'm talking to him and just asking him questions to continue to learn. But then I realized, you know what, boy, every time I talk to him, I'd hear tired. A lot of white friends are reaching out to me to talk to me. Okay. And you realize, holy cow, I'm lazy. I'm going to him and putting it all on him. Why don't you, Chip, go do your own work? Okay. And go do things on your own. And so, I think that this year, that space of time, in that June, July timeframe, Tracey, that's really when it started to just hit me. And I realized then that while it pained me to understand that how much I didn't know, and the fact that how prevalent it was, what I also realized at that point in time is that I made a commitment that I need to do something differently, because the status quo can't go on any longer. So what are the things that I can do differently to start to help shape things that will hopefully have lasting impact? So hopefully that gets at your question, and it really does speak to why this year was different.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Chip. And I think that self-education piece is important, because I know in conversations that I have had, Black people will say, I'm exhausted. Why do I have to educate everybody? And I want to see people take the initiative. So I so appreciate your candor about that. And Tom, I want to put the same question to you. What was it specifically this year that just turned the light on for you? And what have you learned since then?
Yeah, well, a lot of what Chip said, I completely agree with. He and I are wired very similarly, probably because we've known each other since we were like 7, and grew up in the same community. But I agree with most of that. Some of it's obvious. When George Floyd was murdered on May 25th, I think it was, in front of everybody's eyes, night after night after night, because everybody was home because of the pandemic. You could not avoid that. You could not ignore that. And I remember vividly my daughter Sydney, who was 19 at the time, asking me, "Is this like Rodney King?" And I said, "Yes, it's exactly like Rodney King, except that man died here." And then I immediately started thinking, that was 30 years ago. 30.
Right.
And we have made no progress.
Right.
Clearly no progress. I mean, if this were Chip or my business and we made that kind of progress over 30 years, we'd be fired, or we'd be bankrupt, or we'd be out of business. We've made no progress in 30 years. And that it just hit me like, what kind of country are we living in where we just accept the fact that this stuff just goes on and on and on and on. And so that was, I can't remember what day of the week it was, but I knew I had to come in. I had a large team. And I knew I had to come in and talk to the leaders on my team. And I had no idea what I wanted to say, what I was going to say, but I knew I wanted to talk to them. And we started those conversations, and they were raw, and they were emotional, and everyone involved tears. And they actually went well, because I feel like we've built a nice culture of inclusion on our team. But I learned. And when you hear, and I have a slightly different twist on the, it is not the minority's job to educate the majority ever. However, I too began to reach out to all my Black friends, my Black colleagues, Black people on my team, Black friends that I talk to fairly regularly, and Black friends on Facebook that I went to high school with that I haven't talked to in 30 years. I just reached out to them all. And I remember my daughter saying, "You think you should do that? I mean, you haven't talked to people in 30 years and you're going to reach out to them now?" And I said, "I don't know, but I want to try." And to the person, I got a positive response. Yeah. All I said is, "I stand with you, and I'm here with you, and I'll take a knee with you." And I got a positive response from everyone. But I just have to shout out to my team how much they taught me. And to the point, we thought we knew what we were doing. We thought we were exposed to all this. And until you hear the real stories from people people in your life, my teammate Al, who's an executive at a bank, who has to put on a reflector jacket to jog through his own neighborhood
Mm,
because that's the only way he feels safe.
yeah.
Or my teammate Teresa said this to me. Here's a perfect example of how white people need to open their minds. She said, "Hey, let me ask you a question. Somebody in our market who I really like, a white guy, keeps saying that, by 2043, white people will be the minority." She said, why does he have to say that? Why does he feel the need to keep saying that? And I said, that's a great question. I mean, I've heard that stat before, but I've actually never thought about it. And she said, well, how does it make you feel? And I said, I guess if white people are being honest with themselves, it makes them feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But why is that? The only way it can make you feel uncomfortable is if you don't want to be the minority. Why don't you want to be the minority? Because you recognize that they're at a disadvantage. So it's just a whole new way of thinking for me. And I just can't thank my team enough for they don't even realize how much they have taught me. And, listening to people like Chip and our mutual friends, I mean, but they've opened my mind to a new way of thinking. And frankly, one of the things I'm doing differently is I've confronted people I love when they say something that I don't like, or say something that is just lazy or ignorant in response to what they see on the news. Here's one last example. Sorry to drag on here. So one of the people I reached out to is a dear friend named Bill Allen, and he gave me an hour. We just sat down over Zoom and a cocktail and had a conversation. And I'll never forget it. And the next morning, he sent me a presentation on the debate about taking down statues. Something, and it was a 2-hour YouTube presentation that I'll share with Mike. And that's a debate, frankly, that I wasn't sure I was in agreement with taking down some of these statues, right? And I watched this 2-hour presentation by an ACLU lawyer, and it's to me, it's like unequivocal. These statues need to come down. And I would have never thought that way if I didn't sit down with this friend who didn't think I would be open to watching this video. And so I would just encourage all my white friends, and frankly, they're the ones that need to change, particularly the men, then, to just really open your minds to a new way of thinking as it relates to all this. And that's what I've done differently this year. And I thank my teammates for that. Yeah,
I appreciate what you said, Tom, about challenging people. Is that a fairly new thing as a result of this year? Because you people say things, but is it as a result of what you've been learning that you feel comfortable kind of challenging people at this point?
Yeah, I mean, to Chip's earlier point, silence is not acceptable, inaction is not acceptable, and so in the past maybe I would have just brushed it off or ignored it. I won't give the person in my family's name, but the one example was when the looting was going on here in Wilmington. And the comment was just, they should just get jobs. I'm like, really? You really think it's as easy as that?
Yeah.
Like, you need to think deeper. You need to think differently. You need to think about the longstanding problems that have frankly been in existence. Well, they've been in existence for as long as everybody's walking on this Earth's lifetime and longer. And so, yes, Tracey, it's a little bit of I got to do something different, whether it's at work or outside of work, and an intolerance for that kind of lazy response is just going to be one of them for me.
Yeah. Well, we have a number of questions that are popping up from our audience, so I want to go through some of those while we have some time here. Pamela wants to know, have you found a training for your organizations that addresses the unconscious or conscious biases in a meaningful and long-lasting way? Chip, why don't we start with you, and then we'll have Tom weigh in as well.
I think I would tell you that I would point out a couple things. There is obviously unconscious bias training that we provide to people, where you're showing photos of people and you have you're describing somebody, you're saying pick this person, and you realize, holy cow, didn't realize that's who who is on the screen there. The other piece I would tell you is just through courageous conversations. And it's really about, as Tom referenced, it's about getting teammates together. in whether it's teammates talking about their experiences that they've had where you learn from one another, or it's having folks from the external environment coming together to talk about experiences. So, but I think the most important thing that I would say to you is that all that does is continue to create awareness. But honestly, it really comes down to the individual. If the individual is going into that discussion not open-minded, regardless of whatever training we give or whatever folks are speaking to, if they think they know it all, okay, or they're not open-minded at all, then it's really not going to serve its good. That's why I go back to the fact of some of the things that Tom was bringing up, which is, and the point that I made around silence just is no longer an option right now. And as a white male, you know, you've got to model that behavior, and you've got to do it with not only people that you work with, but, you know, I've had conversations just as Tom with some family members around that I care deeply about. I'm like, wait a second, do you realize what you just said? And, you know, and then, okay. But the reality of it is it's going to take time. So my point is training's one thing. It's great, creates awareness, but you keep at it. Don't let it discourage you. Keep at it. But you also have to recognize that people are going to come along at their own pace. In any journey, some people have already crossed the bridge and somebody are at the start line. And you just have to realize that and just keep at it over time.
Tom, anything you'd like to add to that before we move on?
Yeah, we have very similar training around unconscious bias for sure, journey to inclusive teams. I agree with Chip that the value is obviously in the conversations. And so my team since May has maintained these biweekly conversations we call Real Talk. And we take a topic and a different person leads it. I see a couple people that have led it in this meeting, and we just have robust and emotional dialogues about it. One other thing that we tried was a series we called Comfortable Being Uncomfortable. And it was video dialogues of two people that were different, a black person and a white person, a Muslim and a Christian. And the council was looking for people to do these videos. And so they asked if somebody would have an interview and have a conversation with one of our employees who was transgender. And I raised my hand and I said, I'll do it, because I'm completely uncomfortable with that. I don't understand it. I don't know how to behave. I don't know what to say. Let me do it. And I did it. And as a result, I'm incredibly more knowledgeable about it. And I'm incredibly more comfortable with it. I'm incredibly more understanding. And so that was a kind of a new approach to training. But for me, the real question in that question is it sustainable? If we're all being honest with ourselves, we have lost a little momentum since the summer on this topic. We have. And so how do we keep our foot on the pedal and make sure that we continue to make progress in a more rapid fashion than we have over the last 30 years? That is
Well, and so since we're on that subject, Tom, what do you think is the answer to that? I mean, how do you sustain momentum when, you know, news cycles change, you know, the protests have died down, you know, we're focused on COVID and the holidays right now, and then it'll be something else, you know, the inauguration is coming. How do you keep that momentum going?
Yeah, well, it feels like the environment's changed, and yet there was another example of a black man being killed this weekend in Ohio that actually had close links to our Chase family. And so it's very real to all of us. And it is not, there's not an easy answer. It's a really great question. Some of it is systemic and deeply rooted that we have to fix, like the education system. And Chip talked about opportunity earlier, but making opportunities for strong education available to underprivileged kids in inner cities needs to be resolved. So there are some systemic fixes that have to happen. But this can't be a thing. This can't be a project. This can't be a flavor of the month. This has to be a change in the culture and fabric of an organization or of our country. And the only way that happens is if more people, most people, get involved in this. And this may be a controversial statement. I said it earlier. I think it's up to white people. Everybody's got to play their part, but it's up to white people, particularly white men, because they hold most of the leadership positions in our country, to force the change and keep the dialogue alive and keep the momentum alive.
Yeah.
They need to get aboard.
I have a question here. Devon asks, how do you balance the being a true ally, working against oppression, and not becoming a white savior, taking all the credit? Chip Rossi, what do you say to that? How do you keep that balance?
Yeah. Well, listen, I think it's, from my perspective, it's about doing what I think is right. And I can't change the way people are going to perceive the things that I do. What I have to do is be true to myself and what I know is real and what I want to accomplish. And when I say what I want to accomplish is how do I make things better? The reality of it is that I've learned long ago that people are going to feel the way that they are going to feel. What I need to do is just be comfortable with what I'm doing, believe in what I'm doing, and do it to the best of my ability. So, from that perspective, I'm not, I'm not thinking about it that way. I'm thinking about doing what I feel is right.
Yeah. Patricia wants to know, part of the challenge of adding diversity in the workplace is people often get hired by recommendations / who you know. So if it's already mostly a white people's work environment, it will continue to be white unless you open up opportunities to all. Chip, since I'm seeing you on my screen there, I'll let you take that one and then we'll ask Tom to weigh in on that as well.
I mean, listen, it's a wonderful point, and she's right. Representation across all levels of the company, while it's better, it's still not where it needs to be, and you have to be deliberate about that. I think the encouraging thing is that more companies are being more deliberate about that to increase representation across all levels of the organization. And here's what I'd say is the reality of it is that, look, I mean, you're not going to put people that are unqualified in the jobs. Okay. That's just the fact of the matter. But back to Tom's point earlier, okay, there are many qualified people, regardless of race, okay, gender, it doesn't matter. You just got to find them and work at it. And you have to have your goal in mind, which is if you're committed to representation, then you keep working at it to get to that point and be committed to it. And so that's where my head goes from that standpoint. And I would just go back to a second, Tracey, around one of the things Tom was talking about around sustainability. The reality of it, and he talked about the 2 deaths, or 30 year, or Rodney King and the death of George Floyd, 30 years apart. Just look at all of those data points around economic and social inequalities. Yeah. They've existed for decades, centuries. Okay. The reality of it is what we've been doing in the past hasn't worked. And so, what Tom and I worry about, and I think what most of us worry about, it can't be a moment. It just can't be. And we've got to create sustainable change.
Yeah. What did Hamilton say? This is not a moment, it's the movement, right? So. Yeah. We have tons of great comments and questions here. Lots of encouragement for you all. Chris says, as a Black male, I always encourage my Black counterparts to give white people grace. If they are coming to us to learn and understand, we have to provide them grace and mercy on their journey to learn about racial and social injustice. It is a marathon, not a sprint. Lots of thank yous for your honesty here. Goodness, just lots of wonderful comments here. There is a question.
Tracey, can I just add?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Can I add to your last question?
Sure.
And that's kind of back to my earlier point, about the network, and the networks are largely white, so how do you break in? I think it is wholly up to the leaders. And part of what I've been committed to doing is, it's not just sniffing out the bad actors, because they're few and far between, I think. It is sniffing out those who aren't acting at all and forcing them into action. Like I said it earlier on your social media. Good intentions are great, but they're like useless. And we have to get more people turning their intentions into actions. And that starts with leadership. And in our company, leadership's compensation is affected if you don't play an active role in this, and if you don't move the representation numbers. It is a fact. And so I think it is up to the leaders, largely the white leaders, because frankly, if I look at the Black leaders in our company, they have pretty diverse teams. So maybe it's a function of, well, I see somebody like me in that organization, therefore I want to go work there, or maybe they're more committed to it. And so I think it's up to the leaders, largely the white leaders, to expand their networks, bring those people in, and then create the opportunities for them. But I sat down and interviewed 8 teammates before this, black teammates, and asking for their thoughts. And one of them said, "Hey, black people have to have their countermeasures too. So it's like it takes 2 to tango, and black people need to be knocking on the doors, calling on people, building their network, meeting with leaders." And I agree with all that. But then the receiving end has to be willing to do the same.
Yeah, it's like the NFL says, it takes all of us, right?
Right.
Which actually leads me to a question from Hank. And Chip, maybe you can take this one. Hank says, great session, a lot of dialogue about helping get more Black talent in the door. But can you speak to the role senior leadership play in the focused development of Black talent into more senior positions? Chip Rossi, what do you say about that?
Yeah, I think, and Hank, thanks for the question. I think you have to be deliberate about it because, to Tom's point, the people in leadership have the authority to make those decisions. So, from that standpoint, what it comes down to is you have to be deliberate. You have to be deliberate around getting to know the talent within your respective organizations. And then what you also have to do is you have to understand that I got to where I am today, and Tom got to where he is today. I can speak for Tom's behalf because people took chances on us. They took chances. And the reality of it is we have to do the same things at all levels in our organization. Now, what I'd also say this to you is because of the fact that representation isn't as strong as you'd like it to be across all levels of the organization, and we're all making progress there, you have to be deliberate about it. You have to be deliberate about it, and you have to take the time to tell me more about the talent and create opportunities for folks, and be deliberate about the fact that it's represented, that opportunity has representation that you would like to see. Because if you fail there, you're going to miss it every other step of the way. So that's what I would encourage leaders to do in whatever role, in whatever industry you're in, and being deliberate about that discussion and that approach and creating those opportunities and taking a chance on people. Okay. Are things that can serve you well.
So, Chip, all of us know young African-American people. I mean, I've got some in my own family entering the workplace. Some may be struggling to get traction in the workplace. We see the promise in them. We see the ability that they have. We see the potential, and we don't quite know how to help them advance the ball. And so for all of us who are wanting to be supportive of young Black people in our lives who we believe have, the talent and the ability and what it takes, how can we support them to really move forward on their journey? What do you say about that, Tom?
Yeah, well, first of all, tell them to work hard and, be a good person, because that's table stakes in any role. And, JP Morgan Chase will hire 4,000 HBCU students over the next handful of years. And so corporations have a responsibility. We employ most people in this country. We have a responsibility to open up the pathways. And Hank's question was around senior leadership, but we got to build that pipeline at all levels. And I agree with Hank. A lot of companies, once somebody gets to a senior leader level, they just kind of throw them to the wolves. But again, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. All right, you're at a senior leadership table, but do you know what it feels like to be the only Black person there, or the only person of your race in that meeting? No, you don't, if you're a white person. And so you can't just cut people loose at certain levels. And so, your question is really around the entry level and building that pipeline. And so corporations have a responsibility to open the funnel. And we're doing that at JP Morgan Chase through our recruiting efforts through HBCUs. But, I would tell the young people to work hard, be a good person, be a good teammate. The person who is all else equal, the better teammate, is the one who's going to get the next job. And then find your mentor. Chip said people took a chance on us. The funny part of Chip and my story is it was the same guy who took a chance on both of us. And so go find everybody who's new into the workplace or new into role should find that person. You can call them a mentor, you can call them a sponsor, you can call them an advocate, you can call them whatever you want, but find somebody or a group of people that you can go to, that you can talk to, that you trust, that you can be honest with. And it's true that the more people who know who you are around a table when a job opening comes up, the better your shot at getting that job is. But again, it's up to the leaders to bring people different from them into their network, and then it's up to the individuals to begin knocking on the door and take the initiative as well, because they deserve it. They've earned it.
Yeah, I think Tracey, to Tom's point, it is a two-way street. However, I think the most important thing is, wherever you are, if you're the person that person is approaching, or you see something and you want to go talk to the person, just speak to him or her about the things that you view as important to move forward. And to Tom's point, a lot of it is basic, right? It's treat people with respect, be honest with people, work hard, have a positive attitude. It's those types of things. But part of that honest conversation is being vulnerable and talking to them about where you're observing things that potentially could be improved upon. It can't all be, it's not always all rosy, right? It's about that honest conversation. But I would tell you that the most important thing is to have that conversation with the individual.
Yeah, and I don't think we can overstate the importance of mentoring. And someone in the comments, I lost track of it, but someone said that, not just mentoring, but sponsorship is what really kind of moves the needle, right? So critically important for that. I just can't tell you all what wonderful comments we have here in the comment section. Just a lot of engagement from our audience and lots of great questions and points here as well. I want to ask you all before I take it back to April to close out our session. What do you think? We've sort of talked about this in the context of the corporate world, but as you've been observing all the events of 2020 and working in your various diversity initiatives and just watching what is happening across the country, I'm curious to know what each of you think needs to happen to really begin a process of healing on a national level. The healing and the unity that we talk about so often that seems so elusive. What are your thoughts around what we need to do as a nation to begin to heal from some of the things that we've seen, not just this summer, but for the last 400 years? So Chip, I'll start with you, and then we'll have Tom answer as well.
I'll just start with, look, we've been at this for centuries, and we're not where we need to be. And so it's not an easy question. It's very complicated. But, from my perspective, I would just say to you, just speaking from my heart, it just comes down to you got to care. You got to care. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you got to do what feels right to you. It's got to come from a place of authenticity. Okay. And the reality of it is what I would say, Tracey, and I know I'm not being specific because of the fact that it's going to be different from every individual. Because if you want to create sustainable change, it's got to come from a place that matters to that individual. Okay. It really does. Because if it matters to that individual, then they're going to do something about it. And so from my perspective, I think the thing that will help create sustainable change is keeping these conversations going, getting people talking about uncomfortable things and realizing that it's uncomfortable, okay? But getting them more comfortable doing that, okay? Hopefully will lead to people that listen more, acknowledge more, and as a result of that, because they're becoming better educated, they start to do something differently. The only way this change becomes sustainable is if people, okay, actually change their behaviors. But I'll also say this to you. don't make the excuse that you're only one person. It starts with one. It starts with one, and together one brings another person along with them, and there's a multiplying effect. But the point I just say to everybody is, look, as a white male in his mid-50s, okay, the reality of it is this has gone on for far too long, and we can't let it continue. And that's a collective we. We can't let it continue. So let's keep the conversation going and do something differently.
Tom, what do you say?
Yeah, similarly, I am a believer that the world is filled almost entirely with people with good intentions. And we just need people to act. And acting can be as simple as thinking, asking, learning, opening your mind, trying intentionally to get more comfortable with things. I was not comfortable with tonight's session. I've done a million of these, but never on white privilege. And I was not comfortable with it. I'm going to be more comfortable with it tomorrow than I was today. I can tell you that. And so we just need people to take action, turn your goodwill and your good intentions into action. It is the absolute only thing that is going to change it. And I said it earlier. Open your mind to a new way of thinking. I've said that to the people, some of the people I love, and they've teased me about it. But to me, that's what it is. I mean, that's why I've learned so much this year, because I just opened my mind to a new way of thinking about topics that I thought I understood. That's the problem in America. People perpetuate what they already believe by the news channels they watch, by their social media feeds. Like, it's just how it works. It's really why we're so divisive. And people just need to kind of open up their way of thinking. And I think if everybody does that, take some action, and it can be as simple as that, that we'll make progress.
Well, you both are examples of that. You both have done that, which is why all of us are here tonight. And we are so grateful. I just want to thank both of you, Chip and Tom. I just have so enjoyed talking with you both. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate your transparency and vulnerability and your willingness to have this conversation, because conversations around race, we all know, are just fraught. And you have just shared so much honesty with us and so much wisdom. And I just have loved talking with both of you. Can't thank you enough. On that note, I'm going to turn it over to April Adams to close us out.
Hey, Tracey, just on behalf of Tom and I, can we just say thank you so much for, in a topic that's uncomfortable for both of us. You've done a wonderful job, and thank you for just helping shape this conversation and allow us to be more comfortable talking about this particular topic. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Tracey, and thank you, Chip. I love you like a brother. You know that. It's great to partner with you.
All right. April, it's all yours.
I think you're on mute, April.
All right. Do we have April?
April, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There she is.
Thank you guys so much. First, I just want to thank each of you, Chip and Tom. Thank you so much for this type of exhale conversation. Thank you for your vulnerability, your transparency, and I just echo what Tracey said. For being willing to be courageous in tackling this hard conversation. It really is hard. And it's hard for me as well, but for different reasons I assume it's hard for you. But thank you so much for your willingness to come and talk to us about this conversation. Thank you, Tracey, so much for facilitating this conversation. It was excellent. The question was asked, number one, how do we keep our foot to the pedal with regard to racism, with regard to white privilege? And I'd say, it really is just the golden rule. Just do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. I mean, if you can imagine there was a video that Jane Elliott put out. She asked an audience of white people about if you would change places with African Americans. Let me see you raise your hand. Raise your hand if you would change places. Nobody raised their hand. So she said, well, maybe you didn't understand the question. So if you would take a Black person's place, let me see you raise your hand. Nobody raised their hand. And so her conclusion was, so you might not know exactly what's happening, but you know it's not right. You know it's not fair. You know it's not something that you would want for your life. And so, you know, she challenged the audience to not, if you won't want it for yourself, then you shouldn't have allowed it for African Americans. So I would just say, you know, to continue this conversation, and more importantly, to affect change, we have to put ourselves in somebody else's place. And I think having done that will keep the mirror to your face and want to improve and want to do things differently. So I thank you guys for this conversation. I thank you for, you know, for being open and honest. And I think also to keep this in the forefront of not only our faces, but our family, our friends, our co-workers. We have to keep telling the truth. We have to keep acknowledging the truth and telling the truth. Then we can have reconciliation, because without truth, there can be no reconciliation. So,
Right.
so as we continue to face the truth and tell the truth, then I think our country can begin to heal. We have to face the truth. It's not pretty, but it is the truth. And so once we face it and we join hands, then I believe that our country will be in a better place. I just want you all to remember that as African Americans and as white people, we have common bonds. And, you know, just one quick story. I know we have to go, but the reason that I'm in this position with Mike at Common Bonds is because of white privilege. It's because of white privilege. It's because Mike, I worked for him at Bank of America. I worked for Mike. And Mike came through the office and he knew a little bit about my background. We weren't friends or anything. Mike just knows his people. He knew a little bit about my background and what, you know, I did previously to working at Bank of America. So he came through and he said, you know, April, there is a position opening in compliance. You should apply for that position. You know, you have your years in at the Internal Revenue Service. You do, you know, compliance. You should apply. And inside, I shook my head and said to myself, now, am I really going to have this conversation with Mike? And I didn't really, at that time, I knew he was my boss, but I didn't know anything about him. And so, you know, I had the conversation. I said, Mike, I did apply for that job. I applied for the position, and I know that I didn't get it because I'm Black. I have the experience, I have the education, but they just are not going to hire a Black woman. And, you know, Mike looked at me and he could have, this is the traditional response that I'm used to. So Mike could have said, well, you know, there'll be another opening next year. Maybe you can apply, or maybe you should apply for something different. But he didn't do that. He didn't blow me off. He didn't blow off the conversation. What Mike did is the reason why we're friends today. It's the reason why I respect him today. It's the reason why there's a common bond. Mike said, give me a week. Mike said, give me a week. And within a week, I was in a new role. So Mike used his white privilege to help me. And I think if everyone could do their part where they are, I mean, you know what's happening. You know it's not right. You know you wouldn't want it to be you. If everyone could use their privilege, their influence to help somebody. And it's not really to save us. It's just to do what is right, to help level the playing field, to help bridge the gap. Because it just does come down to opportunity. Opportunity is key. And if you can use your white privilege, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Hopefully we won't have the need for it, but while you have it, if we can use it, if you can use it for good. And so with that, again, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for sharing with us. And thank you for being a part of Common Bonds. We absolutely do have common bonds, and we thank you for sharing and being allies with us. And so just really quickly, next month, please join us if you can. Look out for communications regarding racism in health. That's what we're going to focus on next month in January, racism in health. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you so much. Contact us, ask questions if you have any. And we thank you on behalf of Mike and I. Thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for sharing this time with us. Anything else you want to say, Mike? Are we good? All right. That is my hero. For 20 years, he's been my hero. Thank you, guys. Have a good night. Good night, and happy holidays if I don't have a chance to say it to you. Be safe, please, everyone. Please be safe.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Same to you. Happy
Thanks,
holidays.
everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.